Robert Hayes pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridors of the Concordia space station. It was 2 a.m, ship time. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above him as his footsteps echoed on the polished floors. This was his favorite time to work. No crowds. No important people rushing past him like he didn't exist. Just Robert, his mop, and the endless hallways that needed cleaning. He'd been doing this job for 3 years now. 42 years old, wearing a gray jumpsuit with his name stitched on the pocket, invisible to everyone who mattered. The diplomats and ambassadors who walked these halls during the day never looked at him. To them, he was just part of the furniture. Another piece of equipment that kept the station running. Robert didn't mind. The pay was decent. More importantly, it was enough to cover Tommy's medical bills back on Earth. His 12-year-old son had chronic respiratory problems. The treatments were expensive, but they kept Tommy healthy. That was all that mattered. Robert could handle being invisible if it meant his boy could breathe easy. Tonight, he was assigned to clean the royal wing. This was where the most important alien leaders stayed when they visited Concordia. Robert had cleaned these rooms hundreds of times before. Plush carpets. Expensive furniture. Windows that looked out into the vast darkness of space. He'd seen it all. He pushed his cart past the Valtorian ambassador's suite, past the Drachnian delegate's quarters, heading toward the observation deck at the end of the hall. That's when he heard it. A sound he'd never heard before in all his years working here. Someone was crying. Robert paused, his hand on the cart handle. The sound was coming from the observation deck. Soft, broken sobs that seemed to carry pain deeper than anything he'd heard. For a moment, he considered turning around. Whatever was happening in there, it wasn't his business. Important people didn't want janitors seeing them at their worst. But something made him push the cart forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was concern. Robert had always been the type who couldn't walk past someone in pain without at least checking if they were okay. He pressed the button, and the observation deck doors slid open with a quiet hiss. The room was dimmed, lit only by the starlight streaming through the massive window that took up the entire far wall. Millions of stars twinkled in the darkness beyond. And there, sitting on the floor with her back against the glass, was Queen Valara. Robert recognized her immediately. Everyone on Concordia knew who she was. The ruler of the Ketharii Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Her people were tall and elegant, their bodies covered in crystalline formations that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. Right now, those crystals were glowing faintly blue, pulsing with what Robert somehow knew was grief. The queen's head was in her hands. Her shoulders shook with each sob. Tears rolled down her face, and where they fell, they sparkled like liquid diamonds before evaporating in the recycled air. Robert stood frozen in the doorway. He should leave. He should definitely leave. This was Queen Valara. You didn't interrupt an alien queen's private moment of grief. That was probably against a dozen diplomatic protocols. But before he could back out, she lifted her head and saw him. Their eyes met across the darkened room. Robert's heart hammered in his chest. He'd heard stories about the Ketharii. About how their crystalline bodies could withstand incredible damage. About their telepathic abilities. About their pride and their strict codes of honor. He waited for her to order him out. To be angry at the intrusion. Instead, she just stared at him with those large, luminous eyes. They were like nothing human, yet somehow, Robert could read the emotion in them. Pain. Deep, endless pain. "Sorry, Your Majesty," Robert said quickly, gripping his cart. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll come back later to clean." He started to turn, but her voice stopped him cold. "Wait." It was just one word, but it carried such weight that Robert's feet refused to move. He stood there, half turned toward the door, not sure what to do. Queen Valara rose to her feet in one fluid motion. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, and her crystalline exoskeleton caught the starlight as she moved toward him. Robert had to remind himself to breathe. She stopped about 10 feet away, and that's when her eyes shifted downward. She was looking at his cleaning cart. More specifically, at the jalopy he kept clipped to the handle. It was a picture of Tommy, taken at his last birthday party. His son was grinning at the camera, chocolate cake smeared on his face, his eyes bright with happiness. The Queen took another step closer, her gaze locked on that photo. Robert watched as her expression changed from grief to something else. Shock. Recognition. Hope. "Your boy," she whispered. Her voice was musical, with an accent Robert couldn't place. She spoke standard English well, but the words came slowly, carefully. "Your boy. He has my daughter's eyes." Robert blinked, confused. I'm sorry, what? Queen Valara reached out toward the photo, her crystalline fingers trembling. Those eyes. That face. Where did you get this child? That's Tommy. My son. Robert felt a protective instinct rising in his chest. Is something wrong? The Queen's hand dropped to her side. She looked at Robert now, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. How old is he? 12. Almost 13. Why are you asking about my son? Everyone on Concordia knew the story. 5 years ago, Queen Valara's only daughter had disappeared during a diplomatic mission near Earth. The shuttle she was traveling on had been attacked. There were no survivors found. The incident had nearly started a war between the Ketharii Empire and several human colonies. Only Queen Valara's restraint had prevented bloodshed. The Queen had mourned publicly for months. Then she'd thrown herself into diplomatic work, strengthening the peace between their species. But everyone said she'd never been the same. The grief had changed her. Now she stood in front of Robert, tears still wet on her alien face, staring at a picture of his son. I must know about your son, she said urgently. Please. Where did he come from? How did you adopt him? Robert's confusion turned to unease. I don't understand what this is about. Before Queen Valara could answer, the doors burst open. 3 Ketharii guards rushed in, their ceremonial armor gleaming. They positioned themselves between Robert and the Queen, speaking rapidly in their own language. The Queen responded sharply, waving them back. She looked at Robert one more time, her eyes pleading. Please. I mean no harm. I only need to understand. Your son. There is something about him. Something important. The guards were already escorting her toward the door. She resisted, still trying to speak to Robert, but they were insistent. Whatever protocols governed royal security, Robert's presence had apparently violated them. As they led her away, Queen Valara called back over her shoulder. His eyes. Tell me, does he have a birthmark? A pattern on his skin? Then she was gone, the doors sliding shut behind them. Robert stood alone in the observation deck, his heart racing, his mind spinning with questions. He looked down at the photo of Tommy, at his son's bright, happy face. What did an alien queen want with his boy? Robert lay in his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling of his quarters. The digital clock on his nightstand showed 3 in the morning. He'd been lying there for 4 hours, unable to shut his mind off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Queen Valara's face. Heard her voice asking about Tommy. He has my daughter's eyes. What did that even mean? Tommy was human. He'd been Robert's son for almost 13 years. There was no connection between his boy and some alien princess who died in a shuttle crash. It was impossible. Except Queen Valara hadn't seemed crazy. She'd seemed certain. Desperate. Like she'd seen something in that photo that Robert couldn't see. Robert rolled over and grabbed his tablet from the nightstand. He pulled up the picture of Tommy again, studying his son's face in the dim light. Brown hair that was always messy no matter how many times Robert told him to comb it. A gap between his front teeth that the orthodontist said would close on its own. Freckles across his nose from the summer he'd spent at his grandmother's house. And his eyes. Dark brown, almost black. Warm and full of life. Robert had looked into those eyes 1,000 times. He'd seen them light up on Christmas morning. Seen them red from crying when Linda, Robert's wife, had died from cancer 4 years ago. Seen them squeezed shut when Tommy laughed so hard he could barely breathe. They were just eyes. His son's eyes. Nothing alien about them. But doubt had taken root in Robert's mind, and it grew with each passing hour. The next morning, Robert went to work like normal. He pushed his cart through the corridors, mopped floors, emptied trash bins. But his mind was elsewhere. During his lunch break, he sat in the station's small cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee and thinking. He needed information. Real information, not just the thoughts spinning in his head. Robert wasn't an investigator. He was a janitor. But janitors had access to places most people didn't. They had security clearances that let them move through restricted areas. After all, someone had to clean the offices where classified work happened. Nobody paid attention to the cleaning crew. Robert made his decision. That night, instead of starting his usual route, he headed to the station's administrative wing. This was where all the diplomatic records were kept. Files on every alien species that visited Concordia. Reports on incidents and accidents. Everything documented and stored. He used his ID badge to enter the records room. The doors clicked open without any alarms. Why would there be alarms? He cleaned this room twice a week. The computer system recognized him as authorized personnel. The room was cool and quiet, filled with rows of terminals. Robert sat down at one and logged in with his maintenance credentials. His hands shook slightly as he typed. What he was doing wasn't technically illegal, but it definitely bent the rules. If anyone found out he was accessing diplomatic files instead of just cleaning around them, he could lose his job. But he had to know. Robert started searching for information about the HFY princess. He typed in different search terms, working through the station's database. Most of the files were above his clearance level. They showed up as locked folders he couldn't open. Then he found something. A news archive from 5 years ago. Public information, not classified. Robert opened it and started reading. HFY diplomatic shuttle lost near Earth's moon. Princess Kira feared dead. His heart rate picked up as he read through the article. 5 years ago, a small HFY diplomatic shuttle had been traveling from Mars to Earth. Princess Kira, the only child of Queen Valara, had been aboard with a small security team. They were coming to attend a peace conference. The shuttle never made it. According to the report, there was some kind of malfunction. An explosion. The wreckage was found scattered across a debris field near Luna. Search and rescue teams had looked for survivors for 3 weeks. They'd found bodies of the security team, but Princess Kira's body was never recovered. The HFY Empire had demanded a full investigation. Some of their officials claimed it was sabotage, an attack meant to kill the princess and destroy the peace process. Human authorities had found no evidence of foul play. Just a tragic accident. The investigation had concluded that Princess Kira died in the crash, her body likely destroyed in the explosion or lost in space. That had happened 5 years ago. Almost exactly 5 years ago. Robert's hands went numb as he stared at the date on the screen. 5 years ago was when he and Linda had found Tommy. No. That was just coincidence. It had to be. Robert closed the news archive with shaking fingers. He sat there for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. This was crazy. He was connecting dots that didn't connect. Making up patterns where none existed. But he couldn't stop now. He had to know for sure. Robert pulled up another search, this time looking through his personal files stored on the station's network. He found what he was looking for. Medical records. Tommy's medical records that Robert had uploaded years ago, kept on file in case of emergency while Robert worked off-world. He opened the files and started reading through them. There were dozens of doctors' visits documented. Tommy's pediatric Ian back in Seattle had been thorough. Every checkup, every childhood illness, every test result was noted. Robert had read these files before, but he'd never looked at them like this. Never really questioned what he was seeing. Now he did. There, in a report from when Tommy was 3 years old. A note from the doctor about unusual cellular structures in a blood sample. The doctor had run the test 3 times, thinking it was a lab error. The final note said it must be a rare genetic mutation. Nothing to worry about. Another file, from when Tommy was 7. A specialist had examined him because he'd been complaining of headaches. The brain scans had shown some anomalies. Small differences in structure that the doctor couldn't explain. Again, written off as normal human variation. The headaches had gone away on their own. Then there was the allergy testing from last year. Tommy had reacted to the tests in unexpected ways. His immune system had responded to things it shouldn't respond to and ignored things that should have triggered reactions. The allergist had been puzzled but ultimately shrugged it off. All these little oddities. All these things that doctors had noticed but explained away. Robert had never thought twice about them. Tommy was healthy. That was all that mattered. But now, reading through them with fresh eyes, a cold fear settled in Robert's stomach. What if these weren't just quirks? What if they were signs of something else? Robert closed the medical files and sat back in his chair. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the desk beside him. The records room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. He thought about the day they'd found Tommy. Robert and Linda had been trying to have a child for years. They'd gone through fertility treatments, suffered through miscarriages, finally accepted that it might never happen for them. Then they'd started looking into adoption. They'd been at Seattle General Hospital visiting Linda's sister who'd just had surgery. Robert had stepped out to get coffee from the cafeteria. That's when he'd seen the nurse carrying a baby through the hallway. She'd looked stressed, upset. Robert had asked if everything was okay. The nurse had explained that someone had abandoned a baby boy in the hospital. Just left him in the emergency room with a note pinned to his blanket. The note had said, "His parents cannot care for him. Please find him a good home." No names. No explanation. No way to trace who'd left him. Robert had felt something shift in his chest when he'd looked at that baby. Those dark eyes staring up at him. That tiny hand gripping his finger. He'd gone and gotten Linda. They'd both held the baby. Both fallen in love immediately. The hospital social workers had been overwhelmed. There were procedures, paperwork, investigations. But the system was overloaded. Robert and Linda were there, loving, desperate for a child. Within 6 months, through a combination of luck and legal shortcuts, Tommy was officially theirs. They'd asked very few questions. They'd been so grateful, so happy, they hadn't wanted to look too closely at their good fortune. Now Robert wondered what they'd missed. What they'd chosen not to see. He pulled up a calendar on his tablet and did the math. Tommy had been found at the hospital on March 15th. The HFY shuttle had crashed on March 8th. 1 week apart. Robert's breath caught in his throat. Robert stood in the shadows of Hangar Bay 7, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The massive space was normally filled with diplomatic shuttles and cargo vessels, but tonight it was empty except for him. The overhead lights were dimmed for the night cycle, creating pools of darkness between the maintenance equipment. He checked his watch. 11:58. 2 more minutes. Robert had spent the last 3 days wrestling with himself. Part of him said this was insane. Meeting secretly with an alien queen based on nothing but coincidences and a feeling in his gut. The smart thing would be to forget all of it, go back to his normal life, stop asking questions. But he couldn't. Not after what he'd found in those medical records. Not after doing the math on those dates. And definitely not after he'd gone home on his day off and really looked at Tommy. Really studied his son's face while the boy slept. There were things Robert had never noticed before. Or maybe he'd noticed but never let himself think about them. The way Tommy's eyes sometimes seemed to catch light strangely, reflecting it back like an animal's eyes in the dark. How his skin had an almost imperceptible shimmer to it in certain lighting. The birthmark on his shoulder blade that Robert had always thought was just an unusual pattern. Now that birthmark seemed to burn in Robert's mind. A sound made him turn. The service entrance on the far side of the hangar slid open. 2 figures entered. Even in the dim light, Robert recognized Queen Valara's tall form. She was dressed simply, without any of the ceremonial robes he'd seen her wear during diplomatic functions. One guard walked beside her, a shorter HFY whose crystalline armor was dark gray. They approached slowly. Robert forced himself to stand still, to not run. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous. He was just a janitor meeting in secret with one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. If this went wrong, he could disappear and no one would ever know what happened to him. But when Queen Valara stepped into the light, Robert saw her face. She looked afraid too. Vulnerable. Hopeful. This wasn't a powerful queen meeting with a subject. This was a mother desperately searching for answers. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Her guard remained several steps behind, giving them space but watching carefully. "I don't know what I'm doing here," Robert admitted. His voice sounded rough. "I don't know what you want from me." "The truth," Queen Valara said simply. "That is all. May I see the proof you mentioned in your message?" Robert's hand trembled as he pulled out his tablet. He'd taken a photo 3 days ago while Tommy was asleep. His son had been lying on his stomach, shirtless in the summer heat, and Robert had carefully photographed the birthmark on his shoulder blade. He pulled up the image now and held the tablet out to the Queen. Queen Valara took it with both hands. She stared at the screen, and Robert watched as her entire body went rigid. Her crystalline exoskeleton began to glow, pulsing with light that shifted from blue to bright white. The guard stepped forward, alarmed, but the Queen held up one hand to stop him. "This mark," she whispered. Her voice was shaking. "Where did you see this mark?" "On my son's shoulder. He's had it since he was a baby. The doctor said it was just a birthmark. An unusual pattern, but nothing to worry about." Queen Valara touched the screen with one crystalline finger, tracing the pattern in the photo. "This is not a birthmark," she said. "This is the royal seal of House Valara. For 1,000 generations, every member of my family has been born with this mark. It appears on our skin naturally, encoded in our very genetics. It cannot be copied. It cannot be faked." Robert felt the floor seem to tilt under his feet. "That's impossible." "Only my bloodline carries it," the Queen continued, still staring at the image. "My grandfather bore this mark. My mother. Myself. And my daughter." Her voice broke on the last word. "My Kira had this mark on her shoulder. I saw it the day she was born. I kissed it every night before she slept." She looked up at Robert now, tears streaming down her face. Tell me everything about your son. Everything. Please. Robert found himself talking. The words poured out of him. He told her about finding Tommy at the hospital. About the note pinned to his blanket. About how no one had ever claimed him, how the authorities had eventually stopped looking for his birth parents. He told her about the medical oddities, the strange test results that doctors couldn't explain. He told her about Tommy's eyes, and how sometimes they seemed to see things that shouldn't be there. About how his son had always been different from other kids in ways Robert couldn't quite define. More observant. More sensitive. Like he was experiencing the world through different senses than normal humans. Queen Valara listened to every word, her expression shifting between hope and agony. When Robert finished, she was silent for a long moment. I will tell you what happened 5 years ago, she said finally. And then you will understand. She explained that her daughter, Princess Kira, had been traveling to Earth for a peace conference. The princess was only 7 years old then, but Ketharii children learned diplomacy young. It was meant to be a safe, routine trip. The shuttle was sabotaged, Queen Valara said, her voice hard. We know this now, though we could not prove it at the time. There were factions, both among my people and yours, who did not want peace. They wanted war. Killing my daughter would have given them that war. The explosion had torn the shuttle apart. The security team had died instantly, their bodies recovered from the wreckage. But Princess Kira's sleeping quarters had been in a separate section. That section had broken away during the explosion, its emergency systems keeping it intact. We searched for weeks, the Queen said. We scanned every piece of debris, every kilometer of space. We found nothing. I believed my daughter was dead. That her body had been destroyed or lost in the void. But what if it hadn't been? What if that section of the shuttle had survived reentry? What if it had crashed on Earth instead of being destroyed? A human doctor found her, Queen Valara continued. Her name is Dr. Helena Marsh. She was working at a military medical research facility near Seattle. When my daughter's escape pod crashed, Dr. Marsh got to it first. The Queen's crystalline body began to pulse with angry red light. She saw an opportunity. An alien child, possibly the only one in human hands. Think of what could be learned from studying her. Think of the scientific breakthroughs. The military applications. But Princess Kira had been dying. The crash had injured her badly, and her biology couldn't survive in Earth's environment. The oxygen levels were wrong. The atmospheric pressure was wrong. Everything about Earth was slowly killing her. Dr. Marsh made a choice, Queen Valara said. She used experimental genetic modification technology. Illegal technology, banned by interstellar law. She altered my daughter's DNA to make her compatible with Earth's environment. Robert felt sick. She experimented on a child. She saved her life, the Queen said bitterly. But at a cost. The modifications worked. Kira survived. But she no longer looked Ketharii. She looked human. Her crystalline exoskeleton dissolved. Her organs restructured. Her appearance changed. Dr. Marsh had created something that had never existed before, a hybrid that was neither fully Ketharii nor fully human. And then Dr. Marsh had panicked. She realized what she'd done was deeply illegal. If anyone discovered she'd been conducting unauthorized experiments on an alien child, especially a princess, she'd face execution. War would break out between their species. So she disposed of the evidence. She'd taken the 7-year-old child, now appearing to be a human infant due to the genetic changes, and abandoned her at Seattle General Hospital with a note. She thought no one would ever connect a random human baby to a missing Ketharii princess, Queen Valara said. And she was almost right. Robert's legs felt weak. He leaned against a nearby cargo container for support. You're saying Tommy is your daughter? That my son is actually an alien princess who was turned human by some mad scientist. I am saying that the boy you love, the boy you have raised for 12 years, is my daughter Kira. The genetic modifications changed her body but not her soul. Not her essence. She is still herself, still my child, even if she does not remember. The Queen stepped closer to Robert. She was tall enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. I have spent 5 years mourning. 5 years believing my daughter was dead. I continued the peace process because I knew it was what Kira would have wanted. I did not allow myself to hope. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then I saw your photograph. Those eyes. I would know my daughter's eyes anywhere, in any form. And when you mentioned a birthmark, I dared to believe. Now I have seen the royal seal, and I know the truth. Robert's mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. It was too impossible, too insane. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, it all made terrible sense. All those oddities about Tommy. All those unexplained medical results. The timing of everything. What happens now? Robert asked. His voice sounded hollow. You're a queen. You could just take him. I'm nobody. Just a janitor. Queen Valara shook her head. I did not come to take your son from you, Robert Hayes. I came to ask for your help. She explained that Dr. Helena Marsh had not acted alone. The genetic modification technology she'd used was too advanced, too expensive for one person. She'd been part of a larger conspiracy within the human colonial administration. A group that wanted to study alien biology for military purposes, to create weapons and enhancements. They have been watching Tommy, the Queen said. They know what he is. They have been waiting for his HFY biology to resurface. Robert became a different person over the next 2 weeks. On the surface, he was still just a janitor pushing his cart through Concordia's corridors. But now he moved with purpose. Every night shift became an opportunity. Every restricted area he cleaned became a chance to gather evidence. Queen Valara had given him 3 small devices, each no bigger than a button. Surveillance equipment that could tap into data streams and record conversations. Robert's hands had shaken the first time he planted one, attaching it to the underside of a desk in the Colonial Administration offices. He'd expected alarms to sound, security to rush in, his career and freedom to end right there. But nothing happened. Nobody noticed the janitor wiping down desks and emptying trash bins. He was invisible, just like always. Except now that invisibility was a weapon. The second device went into a conference room used by high-ranking military officials. Robert had planted it behind a wall panel while supposedly fixing a loose vent cover. The third went into Senator Frank Morrison's private office, attached to the back of a picture frame while Robert dusted. Each night, Robert would finish his shift and meet Queen Valara in different locations around the station. Sometimes in empty cargo bays. Sometimes in maintenance tunnels. Once in a water treatment facility where the noise of machinery masked their conversations. They'd review what the surveillance devices had captured, piecing together the conspiracy bit by bit. What they discovered made Robert's blood run cold. Dr. Helena Marsh wasn't just some rogue scientist. She was part of a network that stretched through multiple levels of human government and military. The surveillance recordings revealed meeting after meeting, conversations between people Robert had seen on news broadcasts, respected officials who smiled for cameras while planning atrocities behind closed doors. Admiral Patricia Hoffman's voice came through clearly on one recording. The HFY modifications are progressing. Subject 7 survived the latest enhancement protocol. The crystalline structures are integrating with human tissue. Another voice, which Queen Valara identified as Senator Morrison, responded. And the boy? The hybrid specimen from the Seattle project. Still under observation, Dr. Marsh's voice answered. He's showing signs of emergence. The dormant HFY genetics are activating. Another year, maybe 2, and he'll be ready for acquisition. Robert had to grip the wall when he heard that. They were talking about Tommy. His son. Calling him a specimen. Planning to take him. They've been watching him his whole life, Robert said, his voice shaking with rage. All those doctors Tommy saw. Were any of them real? Or were they all part of this? Queen Valara's crystalline face showed no emotion, but her body pulsed with dark red light. Anger. Most were legitimate physicians who saw nothing unusual. But some, I suspect, were reporting to Dr. Marsh. Tracking his development. The surveillance revealed even darker secrets. The conspiracy wasn't just about Tommy. Dr. Marsh and her colleagues had been conducting experiments on HFY prisoners for years. Prisoners who'd been reported as transferred to different facilities or released back to their home worlds. In reality, they'd been taken to a secret research station called Black Site 17. Robert listened to recordings of screaming. Of test subjects begging for mercy in their alien language. Of Dr. Marsh calmly noting down observations as she subjected living beings to genetic modifications and surgical procedures without anesthesia. They're trying to create super soldiers, Queen Valara explained, her voice tight with controlled fury. Human bodies enhanced with HFY abilities. Our strength. Our telepathy. Our crystalline armor. They want all of it. This is insane, Robert said. If this gets out, it'll start a war. That is precisely why we must expose them carefully, the Queen replied. We need evidence that cannot be denied. We need the conspiracy documented so thoroughly that the human government has no choice but to act against these criminals. But gathering evidence was dangerous work. On the 8th night, Robert was in Admiral Hoffman's office, downloading files from her personal computer to a data chip Queen Valara had given him. The Admiral was supposed to be at a reception on the other side of the station. Robert had checked her schedule 3 times. He was halfway through the download when he heard voices in the corridor outside. His heart stopped. The door was opening. Robert grabbed his cleaning supplies and spun around just as Admiral Hoffman walked in with 2 other officers. She stopped, surprised to see someone in her office. "What are you doing here?" Robert's mind raced. His hands were shaking. The data chip was still connected to her computer, hidden on the far side of her desk. If she walked around to sit down, she'd see it immediately. "Sorry, Robert said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Routine cleaning. Your office was on tonight's schedule." He held up his spray bottle as proof. The Admiral frowned. "At this hour? It's nearly midnight." "I'm night shift. Always have been." Robert started moving toward the door, trying to angle himself so the officers would follow him out. "I can come back later if you're busy." One of the other officers, a hard-faced woman with colonel's insignia, stepped forward. "Wait. I've seen you before. You're the one who was asking about medical records in the archives last week." Robert felt ice in his veins. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed him. "Just doing my job. Sometimes I have to clean in restricted areas." "Search him," Admiral Hoffman ordered. The 2 officers grabbed Robert's arms. They went through his pockets, his cleaning supplies, even checked under his uniform collar. Robert's heart hammered. If they found anything, if they even suspected what he'd been doing, he was dead. Queen Valara's diplomatic immunity might protect her, but he was just a janitor. He'd disappear and no one would ask questions. But they found nothing. Robert had learned to be careful. He never carried anything incriminating on his person. After what felt like an eternity, the colonel stepped back. "He's clean." Admiral Hoffman studied Robert with cold eyes. "What's your name, Janitor?" "Robert Hayes, Something flickered in her expression. Recognition? Suspicion? Robert couldn't tell. But she waved him away. "Get out. And next time, check if an office is in use before barging in." Robert left as quickly as he could without running. He forced himself to walk normally, pushing his cart down the corridor. Only when he was 3 levels away did he let himself lean against a wall, gasping for breath. The data chip was still connected to Hoffman's computer. He'd had to leave it behind. Hours of work, gone. Worse, they might find it. They might realize someone had been spying on them. Robert pulled out his communicator and sent a coded message to Queen Valara. Just 2 words, "We're compromised." The next day, things got worse. Robert was in his quarters, trying to sleep after his shift, when his communicator buzzed with an emergency alert. He grabbed it, expecting a message from the Queen. Instead, he saw a news broadcast from Earth. Seattle. The hospital where Tommy went for his regular checkups was on fire. The entire wing that housed pediatric records was engulfed in flames. Robert's stomach dropped. He called his mother, who was watching Tommy back on Earth. The line rang 6 times before she answered. "Robert? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you." "Is Tommy okay? Where is he?" "He's here with me. He's fine. But something strange happened. 2 people came to the house this morning. They said they were from Tommy's doctor's office, that they needed to run some tests. I didn't let them in. Something felt wrong about them." Robert closed his eyes. They were coming for his son. The conspiracy knew he'd been investigating. They were moving to secure Tommy before he could expose them. "Mom, listen to me carefully. Pack a bag for Tommy. Take him to Aunt Jean's house upstate. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't use credit cards. Don't call anyone. Just go, right now." "Robert, you're scaring me. What's happening?" "I can't explain. Please, just trust me. Keep Tommy safe. I'll fix this, I promise." He ended the call and immediately contacted Queen Valara. They needed to act now, before Dr. Marsh and her people could grab Tommy. Before they could destroy all the evidence. Before this whole thing exploded into violence. When they met that night, Queen Valara had news. "My security team captured the data chip from Admiral Hoffman's office. She found it after you left, but before she could analyze it, my people intercepted. We have everything on her computer." "That's great, but they're going after Tommy. They burned the hospital records." They sent people to my mother's house. The Queen's body flashed bright red. Then we have run out of time. We must act tonight. What are you planning? An attack, she said simply. Not with weapons. With truth. We will expose everything at once, broadcast it so widely that the conspiracy cannot contain it. But as they finalized their plans, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Robert's communicator lit up with emergency messages. There had been an explosion in the royal wing. Queen Valara's eyes widened. My quarters. They're attacking me. They ran. Robert abandoned all pretense of being just a janitor. He sprinted through corridors alongside the Queen, her guard rushing ahead. When they reached the royal wing, smoke filled the hallways. Security personnel were everywhere, weapons drawn. Someone had planted a bomb in Queen Valara's private chambers. If she'd been inside, she would have died. But she'd been meeting with Robert instead, planning their exposure. Robert's shuttle touched down at Seattle Spaceport just after dawn. He'd barely slept during the 8-hour flight from Concordia. His mind kept racing, playing out worst-case scenarios. What if he was too late? What if they'd already taken Tommy? What if his son was already locked in some government lab, scared and alone? He took a taxi from the spaceport, giving the driver his mother's address. The morning traffic was heavy, and every red light felt like torture. Robert's leg bounced nervously. His phone was in his hand, but he didn't dare call his mother. If government agents were monitoring communications, any call could lead them straight to Tommy. The taxi pulled onto his mother's street, and Robert's heart sank. 3 black vehicles were parked outside the apartment building. Men in dark suits stood by the entrance. Not police uniforms. Something worse. Federal agents, probably from the Colonial Security Bureau. Actually, let me out here, Robert told the driver, 2 blocks away. He paid quickly and climbed out. He stood on the sidewalk, watching those vehicles from a distance. His mind raced. His mother must have gotten Tommy out before they arrived. She had to have. She was smart, careful. She wouldn't have waited around if she sensed danger. But where would she have gone? Aunt Jean's house like he told her? That seemed too obvious now. The agents would check family members. Robert pulled out his phone. He had one card left to play. One desperate move that could either save his son or destroy everything. His finger hovered over the screen. 3 days ago, after the bombing attempt on Queen Valara, they'd made contingency plans. The Queen had given Robert access to all the evidence they'd gathered. Everything. Audio recordings of the conspiracy. Video footage from the experiments at Black Site 17. Financial records showing money flowing from military budgets into Dr. Marsh's research. Documents signed by Admiral Hoffman and Senator Morrison authorizing illegal activities. It was enough to bring down dozens of powerful people. Enough to spark investigations that would reach the highest levels of human government. Enough to potentially start a war if it wasn't handled carefully. Queen Valara had wanted to release it through proper diplomatic channels. To present the evidence to the Human Colonial Council and let justice take its course. But Robert had argued for something different. Something more immediate and harder to contain. He'd argued for the public. Now, standing on that Seattle street with government agents hunting his son, Robert made his choice. He opened a special app on his phone. Queen Valara's tech people had built it for him. With 3 taps, he could broadcast everything they'd gathered to every major news network, every social media platform, every public forum in human space. And to every Kether communication channel too. This wouldn't just be a human story. It would be galactic news within minutes. Robert's thumb moved. Tap, tap, tap. The upload began. A progress bar appeared on his screen. 30 seconds. That's all it would take for the files to spread beyond anyone's ability to stop them. Robert watched that progress bar fill. 20 seconds. 15. 10. His phone rang. Unknown number. Robert knew who it would be before he answered. Mr. Hayes. Dr. Helena Marsh's voice was cold and professional. I believe we should talk. I don't have anything to say to you. You just uploaded classified materials to public networks. That's treason, Mr. Hayes. They'll execute you for that. Maybe. But everyone will know what you did first. Everyone will know about the experiments. About the children you tortured. About Tommy. There was a pause. When Dr. Marsh spoke again, her voice was harder. You don't understand what you've done. That boy isn't human. He's a security threat. We were protecting humanity's interests. He's my son. And you're a monster. We can still contain this, Dr. Marsh said. The upload can be scrubbed. We have people who can erase it from the networks before it spreads too far. But you need to tell me where the boy is. Right now. Do that, and I'll make sure you get a fair trial instead of a bullet. Robert laughed bitterly. The upload finished 30 seconds ago. You can't scrub it. It's everywhere now. And I have no idea where Tommy is. My mother got him somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never find him. He hung up and turned off his phone. Within minutes, they'd be tracking his location. He needed to move. Robert walked quickly through the streets, keeping his head down. He ducked into a coffee shop and borrowed a public terminal. The news was already breaking. Headlines were exploding across every major network. Human officials accused of illegal alien experimentation. HFY princess revealed alive after 5 years. Colonial Defense Force implicated in war crimes. Videos were spreading. The audio recordings Robert had captured played on loop. Images from Black Site 17 showing HFY prisoners strapped to medical tables. Dr. Marsh's own research notes describing her experiments on Tommy, referring to him as Subject Zero and documenting every change in his biology since infancy. Robert watched the feed scroll past. The story was going viral faster than anything he'd ever seen. Within an hour, protests had begun outside colonial administration buildings. Within 2 hours, 3 major senators were calling for investigations. Within 3 hours, the HFY Empire had issued an official statement demanding justice. Robert left the coffee shop and kept moving. He bought a cheap prepaid phone from a convenience store and finally called his mother using a new number. Robert? Oh, thank God. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Where's Tommy? He's safe. We're at the old cabin. Your father's hunting cabin up in the mountains. Remember? The one that's not in anyone's name anymore. Robert did remember. His father had built that cabin 40 years ago, before digital records and GPS tracking. It was off the grid, accessible only by a rough dirt road that most people didn't know existed. Stay there. Don't come out for anything. I'm handling this. Robert, what's happening? It's all over the news. They're saying Tommy is an alien. They're saying you committed treason. I did what I had to do to protect him. Just keep him safe, Mom. This will be over soon. He's scared, Robert. He heard some of the news reports before I turned everything off. He's asking questions I don't know how to answer. Robert's heart ached. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm coming home. Tell him everything's going to be okay. He hung up and took a deep breath. Now came the hardest part. Robert made his way to the federal building downtown. A crowd had gathered outside, protesters with signs demanding investigations and justice. Robert walked through them, past the security barriers, right up to the front entrance. 2 federal agents immediately grabbed him. Robert Hayes. That's me. They put him in handcuffs and led him inside. Robert didn't resist. This was part of the plan. He needed to be visible, public, impossible to make disappear quietly. They took him to an interrogation room. Robert sat in a metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table. He waited for 20 minutes before the door opened. Admiral Patricia Hoffman walked in. Her face was tight with barely controlled rage. Behind her came Senator Morrison, looking pale and sweaty. And finally, Dr. Helena Marsh, her expression completely cold. You've destroyed everything, Hoffman said without preamble. Years of research. Critical national security programs. All gone because one janitor couldn't mind his own business. Robert met her eyes steadily. You were torturing prisoners and planning to kidnap my son. I did mind my business. I minded what matters. That child isn't yours, Dr. Marsh said. Legally, his classified technology. He belongs to the research program that created him. He's a person. A child. And you turned him into an experiment without his consent. Senator Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, you need to understand the bigger picture. The HFY are more advanced than us. Stronger. Longer lived. If we don't find ways to level the playing field, humanity will always be at their mercy. What we were doing, it was for the survival of our species. By becoming monsters. Robert shook his head. No thanks. I'd rather stay human. The interrogation went on for hours. They threatened him with execution for treason. They promised him deals if he'd recant his story, claimed the evidence was fabricated. They tried everything. Robert said nothing. He just waited. Finally, the door opened again. A new person entered. A woman in an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase. This interrogation is over. Mr. Hayes is being released into protective custody. Admiral Hoffman stood. On whose authority? The President's. There's been a vote in the Colonial Council. Pending investigation, all three of you are suspended from your positions. Mr. Hayes is a protected witness. Robert felt something loosen in his chest. It was working. The public outcry was too strong. The evidence was too damning. They couldn't make this go away. They uncuffed him and led him out of the building. The crowd outside had grown to thousands. When they saw Robert, a cheer went up. He was trending across every social network. People were calling him a hero. Others were calling him a traitor. But everyone knew his name now. Everyone knew Tommy's story. That meant Tommy was safe. They couldn't disappear a child who the entire galaxy was watching. A government car took Robert to a safe house. They said he'd have to stay there until the investigations concluded. That could take weeks or months. But he'd be protected. And Tommy would be protected too. Robert was sitting in the safe house that evening, watching the news, when there was a knock at the door. His security detail checked, then opened it. Queen Valara walked in. She'd come to Earth. Left her empire to travel here personally. Her crystalline body seemed to glow in the dim light of the safe house. You did it, she said simply. The conspiracy is exposed. My people are demanding justice. Your people are demanding investigations. It cannot be hidden now. Is it enough? Robert asked. Will they prosecute? Or will they find some way to bury it? It is enough. Too many people know. Too much evidence exists. Dr. Marsh, Admiral Hoffman, Senator Morrison, they will face trial. And others too. The investigation is already uncovering more conspirators. Robert nodded. Then he asked the question that had been eating at him. What happens to Tommy now? What happens to your daughter? Queen Valara sat down across from him. For a long moment, she was silent. I have spent 5 years believing my daughter was dead, she finally said. 5 years mourning. When I learned the truth, when I saw your photograph, I wanted to take her back immediately. To bring her home to my empire. To reclaim what was stolen from me. But, Robert prompted. But she is not the 7-year-old child who was taken from me. She is 12 years old. She has lived as Tommy Hayes for most of her life. She has memories, experiences, a family. You are her father in every way that truly matters. Robert felt tears burning in his eyes. She's your daughter. Your blood. I'm just the guy who found her. You are the man who raised her. Who loved her. Who risked everything to protect her. That makes you her father. Queen Valara reached out and took Robert's hand. Her crystalline fingers were warm. I propose something, she said. Something unprecedented. Tommy will belong to both our worlds. She will learn about her Cathari heritage. She will spend time in my empire, learning our ways, understanding who she truly is. But she will also remain Tommy Hayes. She will live with you. Go to school on Earth. Have a human life. Is that even possible? Robert asked. It has never been done before. But then, there has never been anyone like Tommy before. She is unique. A bridge between our species. Perhaps that is her destiny. Not to choose one world or the other, but to belong to both. Robert thought about his son. About the boy who loved old movies and hated Brussels sprouts. Who was terrible at math but could draw like an artist. Who had nightmares sometimes and would climb into Robert's bed seeking comfort. That was Tommy. That was his son. But Tommy was also Princess Kira. An alien child who'd survived impossible circumstances. Who carried the blood of an empire in her veins. Maybe the Queen was right. Maybe Tommy didn't have to choose. I want to talk to him first, Robert said. This has to be his choice. Of course. This was always going to be his choice. 2 days later, after the immediate chaos had settled and security was established, they brought Tommy to the safe house. Robert's mother came with him. Tommy ran to Robert the moment he saw him. Robert caught his son in a fierce hug, holding him tight, breathing in the familiar smell of his hair. Dad, what's happening? Everyone's saying crazy things about me. Robert led Tommy to the couch. He sat down beside him, keeping one arm around his shoulders. Queen Valara sat across from them, giving them space but present. Tommy, there's something I need to tell you. Something about where you came from. Robert told him everything. About the crash. About Dr. Marsh's experiments. About Princess Kira. He watched his son's face go through 100 different expressions. Confusion. Disbelief. Fear. Wonder. When Robert finished, Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Queen Valara. You're my birth mother? Yes, the queen said softly. You are my daughter Kira. You were taken from me, changed, but you are still mine. Still my heart. Tommy looked at Robert. But you're my dad. My real dad. I am. I always will be. Nothing changes that. So what happens now? Do I have to go live with her? Do I have to be an alien princess? Robert and Queen Valara exchanged glances. Then Robert said, That's up to you, Tommy. You get to choose what you want. Tommy looked between them. At the father who'd raised him and the mother he'd never known. At his human life and his alien heritage. At two worlds that both claimed him. Can I be both? He asked quietly. Can I be Tommy and Kira? Human and Ketharii? Can I have both of you? Queen Valara smiled, the first genuine smile Robert had seen from her. Yes. You can have both. You can have everything. And Tommy did. Over the following months, a new arrangement took shape. Tommy stayed with Robert, living in Seattle, going to school, maintaining his human life. But he also spent time on Concordia and visited the Ketharii homeworld. He learned about his heritage, his mother's people, the responsibilities that came with being a princess. Dr. Marsh and her co-conspirators went on trial. The evidence was overwhelming. They were convicted of crimes against sentient beings and sentenced to life imprisonment. Black Site 17 was shut down, and the surviving prisoners were returned to their homes. Admiral Hoffman and Senator Morrison were removed from office. Dozens of others connected to the conspiracy lost their positions. The scandal rocked human government for years. But out of the darkness came something unexpected. Humans and Ketharii grew closer. Tommy became a symbol of what was possible when two species chose cooperation over conflict. When they valued life over power. Robert returned to work on Concordia. Not as a janitor this time. He was given a position in the new Human Ketharii Cultural Exchange Program. His job was to help other families navigate the complexities of cross-species adoption and cooperation. He was no longer invisible. People knew his name. Knew his story. Some called him a hero. Others still called him a traitor. Robert didn't care much about either label. He cared that Tommy was safe. That his son was happy. That he could look at himself in the mirror and know he'd done the right thing. One evening, Robert stood in the observation deck where this had all begun. Tommy was beside him, taller now, growing into a young teenager. Queen Valara stood on Tommy's other side. They looked out at the stars together. Three people from two worlds, bound by love and sacrifice and choice. Dad. Tommy said. Yeah, buddy? Thank you. For everything. For fighting for me. Robert pulled his son close. Always. That's what fathers do. Queen Valara placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. And mothers. We protect our children. Both of us. Together. Tommy smiled and leaned into both of them. And in that moment, Robert knew that family wasn't about biology or species or where you came from. It was about who stood beside you. Who fought for you. Who loved you unconditionally. It was about the bonds you chose to honor. And sometimes, the most ordinary person could achieve the most extraordinary things. Not through power or status or special abilities. But through love. Through courage. Through refusing to let fear stop you from doing what was right. Robert Hayes had been just a janitor. Now he was a father who changed two worlds. And that was enough.